In terms of approach, I decided to borrow from the IMF and World Bank, who have aptly established that there are 6 major building blocks for developing a domestic debt market. So I thought that if the debt manager and the lending money banks do what they're supposed to do as regards each of those building blocks, then the job would have been done. If we agree that there are 6 major building blocks, so if the parties concerned do play their roles in establishing each of those building blocks, then the job would have been done. And that's why I have decided to simply do more like a checklist of what each of those parties is supposed to do with respect to each of those building blocks. So that's the approach we are following. According to the IMF and World Bank, there are 6 major building blocks for the domestic debt market, the DDM. The money market, the primary market, the secondary market, the investor base, the market, financial market infrastructure, and the legal and regulatory frameworks. So let's see what the debt manager is supposed to do in respect of the money market. After that, we have a list of what the bank is supposed to do as well. The first thing is that for most developing markets, there is likely to have been some debt already incurred. Most of the time, those debts wouldn't be in appropriate form in terms of the type of instrument, in terms of the tenor, and possibly in terms of the holder, who is the investor. So it is important first to identify in the existing portfolio, what does it look like? So we are talking of reviewing the existing debt portfolio. Having done that, it's most likely you find out that there will be need to implement some operations, some debt management operations on that portfolio to change its form in line with your objective of building a debt market that's developed and that is deep. Invariably, the experience, for example, with a country like Nigeria, when the market was resuscitated in the year 2003, was that we found out that the domestic debt portfolio will contain such legacy debts as treasury bills, short-term instruments of not more than 365 days. But more importantly, you will discover that almost all of it would be held by the monetary authority, the central bank. Of course, that is understandable. Remember that the market does not exist already. And you would expect that when government wanted to borrow, much of the investor base, most of the investment will be the central bank that underwrites such issuances. Remember again that for most countries, at this stage, the DMO, the debt management, does not really exist. And possibly the debt management has just been established and is in line with this establishment of the debt management office that the idea of developing a domestic debt market comes up. So, but before then, it was the central bank, the monetary authority, that would be issuing for government because there was no debt management office. Unfortunately, the central bank would also be the major investor and the underwriter. Indeed, becomes the investor through underwriting. By the guidelines, by the books, there's no way it will be said that, okay, because there's no debt market, the government would borrow directly from the central bank. No. But what usually happens is that because the central bank is acting as the issuer of the debts, as well as the underwriter of the debts, and because the market is not developed, you will not find enough non-bank or non-central bank investors to subscribe to the issuances. And because the central bank is already designated as the underwriter, it ends up absorbing almost all the issuances. Okay? So that's how the central bank ends up being the major holder. So one of the issues to do is to look at the portfolio and confirm that you need to do something. You need to securitize. You need to migrate the debt that existed from the central bank to the other investors, the general public, including the money lending banks in particular. At the same time, you'll be attempting in the securitization to lengthen the duration, the tenor of the instrument, which, as I said, is most likely to be 365 days and under. Now you would like to, at least for a start, try to securitize it and lengthen the tenor to 2 or 3 years. Usually, it should not attempt more than 3 years initially, because remember, you are starting from ground zero. 365 days is as good as there's no tenor. Okay? Okay. Now, given that you are going to do this, it becomes important that you should really approach the monetary authorities and discuss what should be their role. First of all, the monetary authority is the entity you are trying to transit the existing portfolio from their balance sheet to the public. So they should be aware of what you want to do. Secondly, your target usually would be that among the prospective investors that are taking up these migrated portfolio, many of them will be, much of it will be to the money lending banks who are under the supervision of the monetary authority, the central bank. So that's another reason why you need to approach the central bank. And through that, you also know that the central bank will have to play some role in educating the banks themselves. Okay? So you have to liaise with the central bank to know how to prepare the lending money banks for this new venture you want to embark on. Beyond that, you also, that is the debt manager, remember we are talking about the debt manager or the debt management office. You need to now intimate the lending money banks, who, as I said, are most likely to be the major uptakers of the issuance, the securitization you are going to do at this stage. Because even the lending money banks at this stage, you will find out that in most cases, they are not even very seasoned as far as the debt capital market is concerned. They are not really seasoned. They are used to, they're used to just taking deposits, lending money, and all that. So they are not likely to be very conversant with this issue. So you need to sit with them so that you explain to them what you want to do. So that you have to start speaking a common language around the project with them. Have common understanding on what you want to do. Of course, this means also you have to prepare concept notes and guidelines for this securitization you want to do. What is it essentially? Just as I'm explaining here, what is it essentially? You have to document what you really want to do, why you want to do it, what is the end game, what is the strategy, and what is the game plan. You have to design all that, and you have to so prepare the concept notes and the guidelines for getting this done. Now, part of what you discuss with the lending money banks is their capacity, their readiness. In the case of Nigeria, for example, as I said, even though in the 1960s, 1970s, there had been some issuances of debentures by the governments, particularly the federal government and some state governments in the market. But because of the military intervention in the 1960s, the market was disrupted because the military were not interested in any capital market. They will simply ask the central bank to lend money to it to operate. So which means the little market that had started in the 60s and 70s were suspended. So by this time we are discussing in 2003, the market had been off the radar for about 15 to 18 years. Okay? So it means that if you go to the market, you wouldn't even have the right capacity, the right skills in the banks to deal in the debt capital market. Therefore, you need to look at their capacity. So you need to do some needs assessment. Now, the international development partners come handy in this because you will need them to help in the training, in capacity building, both for the personnel of the debt management office and the personnel of the lending money banks. In that case, there will be need for a number of trainings to build the capacity. Apart from that, you will have to do some dry runs with the banks. When you have understood what you want to do, the securitization, you have to explain to them how it will be done. But having done that, issued all the guidelines, studied it with them, had interactive sessions, conferences, seminars, workshops, assisted by those who have the capacity. Most probably the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank would have assisted in bringing experts who are practicing this on an active basis from other jurisdictions to help in the training and capacity building. So once this has been done and the guidelines have been set and there's some common understanding, it will be time to do some dry runs with some experiments with the banks in terms of how it will work. What forms will you fill? What documentation will be done? How do you bid? And all that. So these are the steps the DMO, the debt manager, will have to take. Of course, eventually, it will have to do the real auction, ultimately. But that's also on the assumption that the lending money banks have also followed the checklist and did all their own preparations that will now converge with the efforts of the DMO to now lead to the real auction. And that's why now we are talking of what are the practical steps to be taken by the lending money banks. One, they have to assess, as you have said, and address, even though the DMO is concerned about whether the lending money banks are prepared. The lending money banks themselves have to take responsibility as well, independently, to be preparing for this program. So they have to assess and address that question of their human and the infrastructure capacity. they have to undertake rapid training. So even if the DMO does not initiate this process, the lending money bank has to take it as a responsibility. So in this way, it becomes a way of making sure it is done. Because you can see that these issues of capacity building preparation, each side takes full responsibility, even though from time to time they do it together. But you are not the bank is not going to give excuse that because the DMO did not do it, that's why they are not prepared. On the other hand, the DMO should know that you cannot have a market if you do not prepare the players. So they have to undertake rapid training individually as banks and collectively as a group, as a sector. They have to prepare the operational manuals and their risk management frameworks, their controls, because you are going to a market. You have to say what are the type of risks in this type of market. So you have to have operational manuals. You have to have controls. More importantly, from the point of view of the market operators, the lending money banks, who are the major actors on the other side in this venture, they have to be interested in idea regulations, idea rules that need to be changed. So they have to look at the existing rules, the rules from the central bank, the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and any other rules that exist that guides the operation. Now that they're entering this new type of venture, they have to assess those rules, regulations, to know whether some of them need changes or whether some new laws and rules or regulations need to be introduced to facilitate this process. So they have to do that. And if they articulate all that through the debt management office, they should now make this, channel this to the appropriate authorities to introduce the necessary changes. Among other things, they have to develop a framework for repos, because now that they are taking the responsibility as much as possible to hold, to invest and hold and trade eventually in government securities. There has to be opportunities for those who, well, we thought of cash management yesterday. Banks also have a cash management challenge. Those who need cash urgently, they could have possibilities, some instruments that will help them urgently to walk across to another bank to do a repo, to say, look, I need 20 billion now, this is my instrument, I'm selling it to you, give me the cash, I promise you in the next 3 days or the next 7 days or 30 days, I will buy it back from you and give you cash and restore your liquidity. And of course, that the arrangement is such that with this type of contract made, the transactions are done automatically. In terms of once it is 30 days, the clearing authority will credit the appropriate the other counterparty. Okay? So those are the type of changes. Again, a very important step the lending money banks have to do is in connection with mobilizing deposits. Even though they are usually in the business of taking deposits and lending money. But now they're going to another, it's like expanding your factory. When you're expanding your factory, you need more capital. Whether long-term capital or working capital. So in this sense, you're going to a new market, there's a new product which you're going to be involved in. Therefore, you need more money. Of course, the easiest source of money for banks is deposit. So they have to take initiative to do additional marketing for deposits so that they will have the capacity to participate in this market. Now, as I said, if they take these steps, which I believe is not exhaustive, I'm happy that there will be a session for practitioners from the field, the people from the market side to talk. So when they talk, we see where the gaps are, or they bring some new ideas. So if the deposit money banks, in this case the lending money banks, we call them lending money banks in this case, they're also the deposit money banks, because the deposit they take, they lend, so they're the same people. But in this case, the emphasis is on lending, because they're going to lend to government through buying their securities. They're the same people. Okay, so they have done their own preparation, and on the other hand, the debt management office has done its own preparation. It is that leads to that auction, where the instruments that we are being held by the central bank, mostly short-term securities, are now purchased by the banks, either on 2-year or 3-year basis, through an auction. At this stage, because the markets are not really developed, the practice would be more like, I wouldn't say it's private placement, but something like that. It's more like, relative book building. Now, all the banks who have been prepared be given opportunity to indicate how much of the amount available for securitization they will take and at what price. At this time, I'm sure the DMO will have also mentioned the type of pricing system to use, that it will be marginal pricing, for example, whereby each bank will say what quantity it wants at what price. And of course, when you want to allocate, you start allocating from the one with the lowest price, the one that's asking for the lowest coupon, and continue building until you reach the stage where you have gotten all the amounts you want. And whatever price, that amount, that last bidder that gives you the amount that completed your total requirement, that's the price that you now apply to all the successful bids. That's the marginal rate system. Okay, so that will be the auction. So in simple terms, this is what preparations and what initiatives, actions that need to be taken in the money market, which is the foundation of the debt capital market we are going to build. Now, the second block is primary market. That's the second building block of a debt, domestic debt, is the primary market. Now, this is the market where government now proactively, this is not an existing portfolio that is being securitized from the original holder. This is when the government now proactively wants to start. They say, look, I want to raise 20 billion units of currency from my domestic market, of the local currency, from the domestic market. Remember that in doing so, it does not prohibit foreigners from participating. But the important thing is that whoever is participating is investing in a local currency instrument, no matter whether you are resident or non-resident. Okay, so the market for doing this is the primary market. That's the market that a particular instrument is initially issued by the original issuer who needs the money and who is appealing to various classes of investors, individuals, banks, companies, communities, organizations. So what are the preparations that the DMO should do? Now, a DMO has been established. It has some responsibilities. If you recall what we discussed yesterday, those of us who were around, the issue of debt sustainability, the issue of prudence, the issue of borrowing limit, appropriate borrowing, terms and conditions, for what purpose? Those are the issues that were discussed. That hello? Are you hearing me now? It's back. Okay. But beyond the translation, are you getting me? Are you hearing me everywhere? Okay. Okay. So now that there's a DMO and it is going to be responsible, this is not the one issued by the central bank, the legacy portfolio. It has to be issued properly. Therefore, the DMO has to prepare a medium-term debt management strategy, because a medium-term debt strategy is one of the ultimate goals of products of a medium-term debt management strategy, is that it will say how much should be borrowed, under what terms and conditions, so that the borrowing will be at a minimum cost to government to achieve the objective for which is being borrowed within an acceptable risk limit. That's what a medium-term debt management strategy is supposed to do in terms of what you borrow. It defines how much you can borrow within that period that you can really absorb sustainably. But more importantly, relating it to the purpose of the borrowing, relating it to the cost of the borrowing that is bearable for your economy, as well as ensuring that it is being done within a reasonable risk limit. For example, when the borrowing is to be done, one of the things to consider is, in this case, we are talking of domestic borrowing. So you have to consider, is the tenor long enough that for the purpose you are borrowing, so that the repayment will not be very problematic. Relating it to the liquidity that will be available for you to service the debt when it matures. Okay. So you have to prepare the medium-term debt strategy. I'm sure as the program of the IFDB in this regard goes on, there'll be a time for a specific presentation and workshop on medium-term debt strategy. I know we have done some for the cohorts that have gone by, but for the debt managers, in any case, I know that debt managers must have undergone courses in medium-term debt strategy. But I'm emphasizing that to start up the basic debt market, one of the preliminaries you must do is to have the medium-term debt strategy that defines how much you should borrow and what type of instruments you should use. Is it long-term instrument, medium-term instrument? And that what type of cost can you borrow? And for what type of projects can you borrow at that stage? So you have to prepare that. Now, there has to be market planning in determining what is the fiscal deficit to be covered. And you have to know that it's not all the fiscal deficit that is always covered by borrowing. Sometimes part of the fiscal deficit is covered by extraordinary items. For example, a country might decide to privatize some of its assets so that it can have capital to fill its fiscal deficit. Okay, so you have to say what is the country's fiscal deficit and what portion of it is to be filled by borrowing from the domestic market. That's part of the market planning. Okay, you have to then, based on that, decide what is the annual borrowing program. You have an annual calendar. Assuming you are borrowing 100 billion of local currency, units of the local currency. That 100 billion over the 12 months in a year. How much are you borrowing in January? How much in February? How much? You have to plan that overall, annually. But you also have a quarterly calendar, which will be more specific, particularly in terms of when is it to be done, what day, what week, and all that. And you also have to have a monthly calendar. For most countries that are active in the market, the auctions, the borrowings are done every month. Issuance of government securities are done every month. That's the practice in Nigeria. So you have a calendar that shows what you do for all the year. Now, in deciding out of the 100 billion, how much you have to borrow each month, a lot of things will influence it. Again, it relates to the idea of cash planning, cash management, which was discussed yesterday here. Because you have to know, by the program of the budget, the expenditure that we made as per the Appropriation Act or as per the budget, how much will be needed in the first quarter of the year? And therefore, how much of that expenditure in the first quarter of the year will come from borrowing? So it's not necessary that you are going to now share it into 12 months. No. You have to reflect the realities of when is the money needed. Sometimes you may find out that it is easier for you to raise more of the money in a particular quarter of the year. But the money is needed in a different quarter. Much of the money is needed in a different quarter. So you have to take a decision to possibly front load the issuances of, front load take much of the money, even though you don't need much of it now. How you manage it in terms of placing part of it with the treasury to earn interest is a different issue. But the point I'm trying to make is that the calendar needs a lot of strategic thinking and strategic work, deciding how much you borrow for each month. And it need not be even. It has to reflect the cash needs of government in implementing its budget throughout the year. You have to disseminate the issuance program. That you have to let the public know that, look, there's government is going to borrow using this instrument. And you have to explain to them how it works. So the general public, the market should know all this. And therefore, you have to disseminate information on the issuance procedure, information on the pricing procedure. Invariably, the pricing procedure is the type of auction you use, which I already described in the case of the securitization, which means you are going to say, look, we are going to do it by auction. Let the banks collect bids of their own and from their customers. Those who want to bid will say, okay, I want so much of it at such a price. And then at the end of the auction, the last bid price that was able to complete the total amount needed for that auction, that is the issuance amount, will become the coupon that applies to all the successful bids. Okay. So all these procedures I'm explaining is what the debt manager has to document and explain so that the public will read it and understand. Because you are looking for investors, you want to sell your product. So you have to let the buyers know what this product looks like, how it tests, what is the color, what is the texture. They have to understand it. And so you encourage them to understand it so they can take a decision to buy it. Because it's a product you are selling. You are buying money, but in this case, it's a product actually for you. You have to release as I said, there has to be a quarterly calendar, there has to be a monthly calendar. So when you want to go for auction in the month, you have to issue a circular. Okay? You have to issue an offer circular asking for subscription from investors to invest, having explained to them the system that we follow. Now, the next step the DMO should take is to now go for the auction. And I said this auction had to be regular because you had to plan it for a whole year. It's more like a forward guidance. The market had to have an idea that, look, throughout 2025, the debt management office is going to borrow so much money from the government for the government to fund its activities for the year. And in the first quarter, it's going to borrow so much. In the second quarter, so the investors will start making up their mind how to participate actively because they have an advanced information about what's going to happen. So it's critical that this information is known in advance so investors can prepare. Of course, after the auction, the debt manager had to release the auction result. Now, what are the practical steps to be taken by the lending money banks? They have to ensure that they have adequate human and physical infrastructure for the purpose. This includes platforms. Let me mention that I omitted something in the case of the debt management. The debt management office must critically make sure that it has the appropriate auctioning platform. In this case, an electronic auctioning platform, because people are not necessarily going to come physically to bid. There has to be an automatic auction transfer electronic auctioning platform that people can key into and submit their bids electronically. Okay? So the banks will have to make sure they have adequate infrastructure that can have a handshake with the auctioning platform. And of course, with other platforms in the system, including the platforms of the regulators. Just as in the case of the money market, and particularly in this case, they have to make sure that they have adequate capital for the business. Particularly knowing that banks will appreciate that this is a very profitable business for them. They themselves can invest directly. A bank can invest and buy the bond. That is proprietary, transaction. But also, they have to mobilize customers to invest through them. Okay? So, they have to also do a lot of marketing to explain all those steps that the debt management office took to enlighten the banks and the general public about this product. The banks themselves, individual banks, will take initiative to also enlighten their own customers, because they want as many as possible of their own customers to participate. Because the more their own customers participate in successful bids, the better for them. Because of course, the earn fees based on the volume of transactions that comes through them. So it's a direct business for them, in addition to they themselves investing. So they have to make sure that they disseminate all the information to their own customers and enlighten them. The banks too make sure that they develop a protocol for maximum counterparty compliance. Because in this process, banks appreciate that sooner than later, since they are buying themselves and for their customers, they are likely to sooner than later, even informally, be trading the securities among themselves. Even if there were no organized secondary market, they will still do that. You have an asset, the other man has an asset. Somebody may want to buy more, and somebody may want to sell. So it is important ab initio, even without the formal secondary market, which we'll see later, it's important for them to develop protocols for counterparty compliance to make sure that, look, if Bank A says to Bank B, at the appropriate time, Bank B must pay back. So those protocols will be established among them. So these are steps the lending money banks will take. They have to ensure proprietary participation, that to make sure that themselves have enough capital so that they can participate actively. They have to make sure the market depositors. We have said much of this. Another important function of the lending money banks is that they are the people dealing with the downstream end of the market. They are the people dealing with the investors, even though they sometimes act as investors themselves. But ultimately, they are supposed to mobilize investors. So they are in contact with the real market. So they should be gathering information as to the reaction of the market in terms of pricing, in terms of volume, in terms of frequency, in terms of the rules, in terms of the type of taxation that government puts on their incomes and on these securities. So that they gather this information, they will feed back the debt management office so that where there is need for appropriate changes, including regulations and waivers, that will be done. Now, we have talked about the primary market, which is the market where the government, through the DMO, initially issues these instruments to borrow money from the investors. But the primary market actually would not be sustainable. It will not last. It will not be deep unless there is a secondary market. Essentially, the secondary market is where the securities or debt instruments that have already been issued, as we have just finished doing conceptually, will not be traded, which means there are people who are holding 3-year bonds, which they bought 2 days ago. For certain reasons, they need cash immediately, but they have an instrument that is maturing, even though there be any interest monthly or quarterly or half-yearly. But this instrument is going to mature in 3 years, but they need money now. So, at the same time, there are people who want to buy, even though the next auction is next month, but there are people who want to buy the government security today for one reason or the other. So there should be a market where those who want to sell what they have and those who want to buy, there should be such a market. That market is simply the secondary market. So what steps? Now, as I said, the importance of this market is that it encourages people, even in the primary market. Before you now go and invest your money for 5 years, for 20 years, you already know that if for any reason, within 2 years, instead of 10 years, you need your money, there's a market where you can go. There's a market where there are many people who are ready to buy it from you at the prevailing market price at that time, which is the yield. And also, people know that if they want to buy, there are people who are ready to sell. So, with that confidence that there's a ready market, people boldly go into the primary market, knowing that they are not constrained by the tenor of the instrument they hold, because they're being traded in the secondary market. So, what steps should the debt manager take? One, it will ensure that there are guidelines for transparency in the trading of the securities. Transparency. People should understand what they're doing. Everybody will understand, it will be clear, nothing will be hazy. So there have to be guidelines that make sure that there's transparency. Now, to be able to do this, you have to be sure that there are enough number of operators in that market. Because you know, once the market is limited to a few people, if it's the oligopolistic, oligosonic, then there's tendency for collusion. But when you have many players, the chances for collusion is reduced. One of the most important things the DMO has to do is to establish a core, a group of people whose job is to buy and sell. At any point in time, they are ready to buy and they are ready to sell the bonds that have already been issued. Which means these are people who at any point in time, when you go to their sites, you will find out that, look, they say 10-year FGM bond maturing in so-so year. As that today, I'm ready to buy it at so-so price. And as that today, I'm ready to sell at so-so price. So they always have two-way quotes. They're always ready to, which goes back to the issue I made about capital adequacy. That when they want to go to this, they have to. That is why when we come to these traders, which are to be settled by the debt management office, the primary dealer market makers, that's what they're called. These people who make two-way quotes, always ready to buy and sell securities. They have to have enough capital. And that's why when you are making guidelines for them, the guidelines include a minimum capital base they must have to participate. And usually you will say banks, discount houses. Invariably, 90% of the time, it is banks that qualify because of their capital base that already been determined by the central bank. But some discount houses also qualify. But the important thing is that there's a minimum capital base they must have for them to be licensed as primary dealer market makers. So that means that one of the things the DMO does to prepare for settlement is to make sure you establish the primary dealing market making system. Here you have licensed certain financial institutions as those who are allowed to buy and sell the government securities on a two-way quote basis. So these people being paneled, one of the jobs of the PDM is also to decide on the benchmark curve. Therefore, when you are issuing the bonds, one of the things you take into account is to make sure that you have issued enough quantity so that there will be liquidity in the market, so that people are not looking for the bond and they will not find it. So the market has to have depth. So when you are issuing, you have to ask, is this quantum big enough to encourage a primary dealer to come and seek for take the pains of seeking for a license? with all the rules and regulations it must comply with. Does it make sense for them? So the market has to be big enough. And market being big enough means that the volume of securities to be bought and sold in the market is big enough. And that's why sometimes it's more difficult for small economies to be able to establish a domestic debt market. And that's one of the challenges that has to be addressed. And whether such countries, is there a way, particularly if they are geographically contiguous. In any case, the geographical contiguity is irrelevant. With digitalization and with digitalization, every place is contiguous with every place, isn't it? So in that case, so for small markets, there are possibilities of arrangement where small countries with small economies could aggregate themselves to have a common domestic market. I mean, that's a possibility. But the point I'm trying to make, I'm making that in connection with the fact that there has to be enough volume of securities to support this type of market we are trying to develop. Now, of course, they have to, we are going to the role of the lending money banks. Again, they have to make sure they mobilize enough investors to the auctions initially, because it is these same investors that you mobilize to participate in the primary market that you may need to sell what they have. And that is the secondary market business for you. So it makes sense for a PDMM to think in advance that, look, I need to mobilize as many customers as possible. Even though there are people who did not participate in the primary market, but they want to come and buy in the secondary market through me. But it's more likely that for me, it's better for me that I mobilize enough investors to participate in the primary market, because a good number of them may be wanting to sell their securities midway in the secondary market. And that's a business for me as the lending money bank, as a primary dealer market maker. So they should also make inputs in the market guidelines. That's another step they must take. That when the guidelines which the DMO has prepared with other regulators on how the market should function, they should also make inputs. They should make sure they establish a capacity for two-way quotes, including through capital adequacy. They should make sure, find ways of making sure, through capital adequacy and other means, that the quota allocated to them, because each time PDMMs are established, are appointed, let's say in a particular year, because these are reviewed in every 2 years or every 3 years. Suppose at this point in time, a country, let's say Kenya or South Africa, has 20 primary dealer market makers for this year. After the review they did by the end of last year, decided that, look, these are the people who have the capacity to be primary dealers market makers in 2024. Based on that, they will allocate quotas of transactions to them, the volume of transactions you must do on a proprietary basis and on an agency basis. Okay? So it is to the benefit of every primary dealer market maker to make sure that you get as much, you feel as much of your quota as possible. It's not that if you, anytime you don't feel it, that you will be told to go. No. But it's to your advantage to do the maximum as against having a short. Okay? Because in the assessment at the end of the period, after 1 year or 2 year period, in the assessment of deciding who continues or who doesn't continue, that's part of the criteria for deciding whether you are really performing or not performing. So you should endeavor to take up the maximum allocation for allocation on each auction that is assigned to you. Of course, internally, every lending money bank that is a PDMM should ensure that it has enough internal regulations on how it approaches this market, how it keeps its record, how it manages it to make sure that it avoids the risks, including counterparty risks, as well as making sure of internal controls that their traders are not involved in malpractices All those are necessary. And one of the ways they ensure this is that they have to be transparent. That's what the thing we discussed a couple of days ago. Transparency, including making sure that at every point in time, they let their stakeholders know what they're doing. How much are they trading on? How much are they selling? How much are they sold for this month? How much have they bought for this month? At what prices? So people, stakeholders, and investors and their customers will have a clear idea of how they are performing in this market. So they have to be transparent. The lending money markets now aggregated or specified now as primary digital market maker must have a self-regulating system. So they should have their own self-regulation to make sure that they are behaving well, even though they have external regulators. But it's to their benefit to make sure internally there are ways of managing and ensuring control and the compliance among themselves, so that they will appear good before the overall economy, and so that there will be confidence in what they do. Remember, every market, particularly financial markets, depend a lot on confidence, perception, confidence, trust. So it's to their benefit, because now this is part of their business. So the longer it stays, the better. So it's to their advantage to make sure that the people trust them and participate. So we have dealt with the money market, the primary market, and secondary market as three of the building blocks. The fourth building block is the investor base, which actually we have been mentioning in relation to the other market, because none of the markets would work without investors. But now, this is a focus on the investor base. For the market to develop, there has to be an explicit attempt to make sure that you have a diversified range of investors. Important diversification is one of the things you have to make sure about. So the debt management office will have to identify who are the major investor bases: farmers, contractors, banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and others. And take initiative to engage these different groups of investors, to enlighten them and to get their buy-in into being active participants in the market, because it's interested in forming the base, because the investor base is critical for this market to survive, for the debt capital market, for the domestic debt market to survive. You need that investor base where government, when it does need money, can easily get the money. Now, we are not now talking about what the money is used for. Although part of the marketing points to the investors is appealing to their responsibility for the economy, for the development of the economy. That in doing this, you are not only making money, but you are also helping to develop the economy by making money, long-term money, available for the provision of infrastructure and other projects that lead to improve the well-being of the people through economic growth, greater employment, poverty reduction. So you have to identify the major people and talk to them. You have to take certain initiatives, as I said, for sensitizing them. There may also be need for reforms. And this is critical for debt management officers. You have to be thinking ahead in terms of what are the potential investor bases that have not been developed, that can be developed through reforms, very structural, serious reforms, and so that you can stimulate the various authorities responsible for those required institutions or processes to be set in motion. For example, you know that in every economy, pension funds are a very reliable source of long-term funds, pension funds. So in your country, as a debt manager, which is one of the things that's done in Nigeria, you have to find a way of encouraging the development of pension reforms, contributory, funded pension reform, because there are countries where you have pension reform, pension systems, but it's like when the worker retires, the government will budget money and find money to settle the worker, either the government or even the private sector employer. So the debt manager will encourage a contributory pension reform, a pension system whereby as the worker proceeds in his career, the money for settling his gratuity and for the monthly pensions are already being accumulated. You get that? It's already being accumulated. So that there's no chance that at the end of the day, when the man retires from the employment, there'll be no money because of currently prevailing economic conditions. You will not be able to pay him, and the man dies of heart attack. So the debt manager will encourage this pension reform. Let us start a contributory funded pension system. And in most cases, it's contributory because the employer will be contributing to the pool, and the employee will be putting part of his monthly or her monthly earnings into the pool. Now, this forms a very stable and always growing pool of funds. So that's why you should encourage pension funds, because pension funds eventually become very critical investors in the market, in the domestic market. You should also advocate similar reforms I've explained in the insurance sector. That's another sector where you can have reliable sources of long-term funds. Because insurers, for example, or the or the pensions people know that, look, the man is retiring in the next 20 years. So this money I'm accumulating for him, I can invest it in a 5-year or 10-year government bond. First of all, you are sure of the security, because in almost every place, the government security is about the most secure. Okay? So in terms of security, the pension manager is very comfortable that it had put them on in a very reliable and trustworthy, asset. So it's advantageous to them. So indeed, the development of the domestic capital market is mutually beneficial to the pension industry and to the debt management office. Both need themselves, because without this market, the pension funds manager may not have enough outlets, enough options for where to invest the money funds is accumulating profitably and securely. Now, the debt manager has to think in terms of introducing new products in the market. Now, remember, we are talking of investor base. You know that there are some investors. You have to think in terms of what is the appetite of various types of investors. Okay? It's like if you are a restaurant. You know, some people prefer akpo, some people prefer ewedu, some people prefer what's the popular food in Ethiopia? Some people prefer jara. So a restaurant that is in big business, we have all these varieties to appeal to the different tastes. So also the debt manager has to appeal to the taste of the different types of investors. So that's why beyond the conventional bond, sovereign bond, the conventional standard one, plain one, which is assumed is what we are talking about, you have to introduce new ones that appeal to different classes. For example, you have to think at times, look, most of the sovereign bonds we issue are in big denominations, minimum of 5 million, for example, of your currency. Maybe this is not affordable to the ordinary people on the street, but they should be part of it. So how do you aggregate? How do you collect their own funds? So then you think in terms of introducing a savings bond that instead of requiring them to bring 5 million, require them to bring 5,000 of your currency, so that it appeals to the retail level of investors. So that could be a savings bond, could be now a government sovereign savings bond. You could also appreciate that you need bonds that appeal to various faiths. Like we know that Sukuk appeals to, is Sharia compliant and appeals to Muslims, and as well as to other people. But, you know, fundamentally it appeals to Muslims. So you introduce Sukuk. Okay, you also think in terms of a local currency diaspora bond. You want to appeal to your citizens overseas, but you want them now to invest in the local currency. Of course, you have a double advantage, because when they invest in your local currency, they will bring their foreign currency, hard currency. It passes through your system, so it boosts your reserve. It boosts the supply of foreign or hard currency in your economy. But now it's converted to Naira, because, to the local currency, because they are investing in local currency bond. So you issue diaspora bond. For each of these, of course, you know about now that we are talking of environmental friendliness and greenness, you also can introduce a green bond, okay, for various environmentally friendly investors. Now, for each of these instruments, of course, there are elaborate preparations. We are simply listing them here. But the important thing is that the debt manager, in terms of developing the investor base progressively, because all of this won't be done in the first year, progressively, you have to think in terms of these options in trying to build the investor base through instruments, through enlightenment, through various methods, through reforms, through building new institutions, like the pension system. If it's not working fine, you encourage it to be. It's not your industry. In pension, the industry is not your industry. But it's also a regulated industry, just as banks are being regulated by the central bank of the country. So also the pension system is also being regulated. So you have to find a way of encouraging through your Minister of Finance, who is your supervisor, to link up with the counterparts that are responsible for these other institutions, so that the necessary reforms will be made for the benefit of the economy. But because of your selfish interest as a debt manager as well, it benefits the economy. But what is motivating you is that it's your responsibility to develop the investor base. Of course, you have to do a lot of public enlightenment to market this. Similarly, there are steps to be taken by the lending money banks. They have to introduce market excellence. Each bank will have to struggle to find ways to attract customers to itself using various methods, bonuses, raffles, free gifts, Christmas parties for the children of the, So you have to think about market excellence. So you have a good image, so you can attract customers. Remember, ultimately, what you are doing is also good for the economy. Because one of the challenges every economy has is, are you mobilizing enough savings so that much of the incomes, a good part of it, does not lie idle or is not put in wasteful or conspicuous consumption, but is put in savings where it can be harnessed for long-term development of the economy. So what we are doing is to encourage savings habits at all levels of the society, among households, among corporates. Also, for each of these new products that we have talked about, introduced by the Debt Management Office, it is the responsibility of the lending money banks to market them, enlighten the public about them. Because the public is going to access these new products through banks. So it's to your advantage to enlighten them. So it's your job. It's what I say you must take. So that as new products are being turned out by the Debt Management Office, you are busy making sure, even though the DMO is doing its own enlightenment, you make sure you are also enlightening. So customers will feel that you are responsible, socially responsible, and they'll be attracted to do business through you. I think finally, the lending money bank has to be feeding back, has to be gathering intelligence, information as to how the market, how people, how customers, how the various investors are reacting to these various products and these various schemes and these various reforms, so that it can feed back into the system for appropriate changes or adjustments to be made. That also adds to sustainability, the ability to change, adapt, to the tests and the interests of the stakeholders. The fifth building block is the market infrastructure. Now, the infrastructure here includes both physical infrastructure and institutional infrastructure. Physical in the sense that, as you can see here, for the PDM, one of the things you have to consider, do you have an efficient bond auctioning platform, which will encourage non-monopoly, which will encourage connectivity in the system. Remember that in the market, beyond the primary dealers, if people are buying and selling the financial market, even without it being federal government bonds or sovereign bonds, you have to have clearing houses. You have to have settlement institutions. You have to have registrars. You have to have custodians. So you have to establish a platform that can speak to this array of institutions. But implicitly, it means that part of the infrastructure is that these institutions also have to be in place. This is part of the market infrastructure. The soft side of it is these institutions having efficient clearing system, efficient settlement systems, efficient registrar systems, efficient custodial systems. When you buy a bond as an individual or just as a customer, you buy a bond. You are buying it through your, for example, through your primary dealer market maker. The bank will debit your account because they're buying an asset for you, the sovereign bond. Okay? Now, it is the bank that is the custodian of that asset you have. It's like when you have a building, you have an estate manager who is responsible for collecting rents for you. Okay, so it is the bank that bought for you, the primary dealer market maker, for example, that is responsible for making sure that keeping record. Okay, anytime you ask them questions, they will be able to answer on that particular asset which they are caring for you, they are nursing for you. And of course, when it matures, the arrangement must have been that when it matures, they will credit back that to your account from which they funded the purchase. You understand? So they are doing a job. It's a job on itself, which is paid for. Okay, so but the point I'm trying to make is that you have all these other institutions. So for the domestic debt market to work, the debt manager, is it from here? Okay. The debt manager has to make sure that all these institutional infrastructure are in place because they are part and parcel of the ecosystem of the domestic debt market. Because as you are trading, they have to people register jobs, they have to custodial jobs. They have to make sure that those who want to do custodial jobs also have the capacity for it. They have the necessary infrastructure for it. They have the necessary human resources that know how to do registrar and custodial business. You have the institutions they claim to be doing the settlement, they say clearing systems. You have to be sure that they have the infrastructure and the human resources, the skills to do that part of the job. So these are part of the market infrastructure. Okay, so the debt manager had to liaise with these market operators to make sure appropriate infrastructure are in place. What are the steps? Oops, we didn't jump anything. The steps to be taken by the lending money banks. They have to be sure they have the infrastructure that is market friendly and that is effective. For example, you have to be sure that investors, those who have invested through you, if they want to check their balance, it's like you wanting to check you are balancing your bank account. You know, the app might be friendly or unfriendly. There are apps that want you to move from here to Casablanca and come back before you can access your account. Okay. So it is the job of the NBC to make sure that the infrastructure they have is market friendly, but also is effective. And if there are infrastructure that the lending money banks believe should be provided in the economy, not by them as the private sector, but by the regulators and by the governors of the economy, they should also make requisition for it through the debt management office. I hope you get what I'm saying. For example, if they need further optics for their own local infrastructure to work, okay? So they should present this so that the government, the country knows that, look, that this infrastructure that the country needs to facilitate the work of those who operate in the financial system. So they have to take time to articulate this. As I said, but each of them has to be sure that also the infrastructure it has is one that has a seamless handshake with the bond auctioning platform, other platforms operated by the debt management office, as well as the other platforms being used by the other parties they deal with. The settlement institutions, the clearing institutions, the registry institutions. So they have to look at the total configuration of their electronic infrastructure so that it is compatible with the rest of the players and institutions in the market. It's to the advantage, of course, because that enables efficiency, it enables speed, and that is to the advantage. Now, the sixth building block for developing an efficient and robust domestic debt market is legal and regulatory framework. For the EDM, it has to start from itself. The debt management office has to start from itself when it comes to legal and regulatory requirements. It has to ask itself, I am a debt manager, I'm a debt management office. Do I have a legal backing? So, one of the first things the DMO must do is to ensure that the law establishing it is in place, if it's not already in place. Again, example of Nigeria. DMO in Nigeria started in the year 2000, but the Debt Management Office Act came in only in 2003, which means the DMO was part of the champions for the DMO Establishment Act, because you yourself you have to have a legal basis before you talk of other legal requirements in the sector you are helping to control and manage. So that is important. So any country that don't have a DMO Act, a law establishing the DMO should ensure they do that. Of course, the assumption is that the DMO has been established as a separate entity, which is one of the reasons why it should be a separate entity, so that it has its own law that suits its own peculiarities. Because when you are subsumed in a central bank or Ministry of Finance, there are chances, there are high, the probability is high that the laws there, even though it captures all the public financial management, it will not be tailored. It will not really drill down to the requirements of public debt management. So ideally, there should be a debt management office as an entity, not as a department in another ministry, even though it should be reporting to the cabinet through a minister. There are two different things. Being part of the ministry that have to report to the PAMSEC is different before you reach the minister. It's different from reporting straight to the minister so as to reach the cabinet. There are two different things. Okay, so the assumption is that there's such a DMO. The DMO has to make sure it is backed by law. Now, the DMO has to now go ahead to review all the rules and regulations which the regulators, including the bank, the central bank, which regulates the banks, which are the big actors in the domestic debt market, the insurance commission, which regulates the insurance companies, the pension commission, which regulates the pension funds, the Securities and Exchange Commission. All these regulators, the DMO had to take time to look at their rules and regulations for those who participate in the domestic debt market and see whether all of them are in tune with the expected development and deepening of the debt market. Where it is not so, they take initiatives, advocate for the necessary changes. For example, we take a simple example to show. Like, DMO will have to let the central bank know that, look, we have to encourage banks to participate in the bond market. So, their investments in sovereign bonds should be counted as part of their liquid assets. Are you getting that? Does that make sense? You know, when you invest in FGM bond, for example, you buy a 5-year bond or a 20-year bond. Ordinarily, in ordinary parlance, it's not liquid. Okay? You say it's 20-year bond. But also, you know that CBN has regulations of what is liquid assets and what is illiquid assets for banks, for their balance sheets. So, and it's the advantage for the banks that whatever is counted as liquid asset is also part of its own long-term investment. Because ordinarily, if a bank invests in a 20-year bond and it does not count as part of its liquid asset, then it will be under pressure to satisfy that requirement if the liquidity ratio is 20%, for example. But if already it has been accepted that this investment in 20-year GM bond is part of your liquid asset, then it reduces your requirement, your pressure to satisfy that requirement. Are you getting it? Okay, so that's why I'm saying that the DMO has to look at the rules and regulations affecting the various participants to know how it can advocate for changes. Also, it's the DMO that will remind the tax authorities through the Ministry of Finance, the fiscal authorities, that look, there should be tax waivers on incomes from sovereign securities, maybe for the first 5 years of the operation of the market. That look, we want to develop the market. So let's say until it is 7 years, all incomes any investor earns from investing in the sovereign bond should be tax exempt. So there's tax waiver. So I'm just giving examples of the type of initiatives the DMO can take in respect of regulators to encourage the development of the market by solving the problems of the participants, like the banks or any investor. Because investors will be encouraged that, look, apart from sovereign bond being very secure, it is also offering me a reasonable return and it is tax-free. So those are the type of things the PDM, the public debt manager looks out for. In addition, the DMO must look at the ultimate law, that is the constitution of the country. Every country has a constitution, written constitution. So the DMO, in trying to develop the market, has to go and scrutinize the constitution line by line to know how it affects the development of the market, and so that if there are needs for any constitutional changes, the case for that could be made. So I've talked about the tax waivers, liquidity status. Now, at this junction, let me mention that before we forget, because we are reaching the end. When we saw developing the domestic debt market, the emphasis is on sovereign bond. However, possibly the more important reason for the development of the domestic market is not for government to sell its securities. It is the initial motivation, but it is hardly the end. When you develop the domestic debt market, you must keep in mind that the objective is that apart from the sovereign, other entities that play in the economy, the sub-sovereigns and the corporates, should also start issuing their own securities in that domestic debt market. I hope that is clear. Even though the sovereign bond market is the beginning, but it's not the end. Yes, the government wants to have access to money from the market, but so also should the subnationals and the corporates. Because it doesn't make sense for government to be developing infrastructure while the rich sector, agriculture, manufacturing, mineral processing, are not proceeding accordingly. The whole essence of providing infrastructure is to make the economy boom. And the economy is not going to boom by public sector manufacturing or production. The economy is going to boom because the private sector is going to take advantage of the market to source funds to develop agriculture, mining, transportation, and the rest of them. And when we talk of export diversification as a part of debt sustainability, who is going to do the export diversification? It's the private sector. It's not the government that's going to produce to export, except governments that are lucky or unlucky to have dominance over minerals, quit the export on behalf of the country. But in general, it is the private sector that's going to generate growth and development. It's the private sector that's going to do the employment. It's the private sector that's going to generate the revenue in the economy, which the government will tax, so that your tax GDP ratio is high, and so that your debt service ratio is low, because the government is generating enough revenue by taxing the companies that are producing the various taxes. Corporate tax, income tax, tariffs, all that, and all that. So the debt manager must bear in mind that what he's doing is not just to serve the government. It is ultimately to serve the overall economy. The government being the platform for the rest of the economy, particularly the private sector, to stand, to do the job that must be done in the economy. And so when we talk of debt sustainability, much of it has to do with productivity of the economy. And productivity of the economy is the private sector, essentially. So a debt manager must know that the development of the private sector, the rapid growth of the private sector on a sustainable basis is part and parcel of what will make your debt sustainable in the medium to long term. Therefore, when you are developing the domestic debt market, that's why you are asking, now look, the various regulators must grant opportunity through waivers and through other concessions for sub-sovereigns as well as corporates to issue their own bonds. Now, of course, there is the challenge of to what extent should the public be raising money from the same market and the private, the challenge of crowding out. But that's a different issue. Let's start from the basic principle, which is that, there's enough. So what we are saying is that, indeed, we must make room in our planning, in debt management, for the private sector to take advantage. So that you have to appreciate that the yield curve, remember we say you start issuing bonds. You start from 2 years, 3 years, maybe after 2 years, you move to 10-year bonds, you move to 20-year bonds, you move to 30-year bonds. Remember, the longer, the better, in terms of the type of money you need to develop infrastructure in the economy, to fund education, health, transportation, railways, ICT. You need long-term funds, as long as possible. So one of the reasons why you develop the secondary market, which we have looked at, is that people will be very happy to invest their money in 30-year bonds because they know that if for any reason, midway, they need the money, they don't need to wait for 30 years because there's a secondary market that is working where they can go and sell their debt and collect cash because there are ready buyers and ready sellers in that market every time. I hope you get that logic. So once you have done that, the same thing now has to apply to the corporate. Having established this, the corporates, the private sector, will stand on that established platform, the yield curve that has been established, to start issuing their own bonds. So that those who want to invest in private sector bonds will appreciate that, okay, the sovereign 20-year bond, so at 10%, for example. So for the private sector, maybe I'll be ready to take 11% instead of 10% because the sovereign risk is supposed to be much lower, right? Okay. So in doing, which means by establishing a reliable domestic debt market, you have made it easy for an investor to price the security issued by private sector. Because if you didn't have a sovereign bond, the investor will be at a loss as to should it be 5% I should pay to company X, should it be 10%? But already you have established the sovereign yield curve. So you know the price of the equivalent tenor of a sovereign bond. So it's easy for you as an investor to say, okay, I'm ready to take 11% instead of 10 from the corporate because the government bond is better, is a superior bond. Are you getting the point? Okay, so that's how it links up. So now, what are the practical steps by the lending money banks? Of course, again, like the private, like the PDM. So, like the PDM, is to review all the existing laws. Remember, one of the principles is that for every building block, the debt management office would assume responsibility independently, as if it is responsible for making sure it works. But also, the lending money banks will assume almost the same level of responsibility on their own. Okay? Because they have an interest. It's their business. They're going to make money from it. It's a business being developed for them. So they should take initiative to say, how best will I take advantage of this opportunity? So there is a meeting of interest. Okay, so they have to make sure that the rules, regulations, and legal provisions are being reviewed and they're adequate the way they are. And if there are changes to be made, they should let the DMO and other authorities know for changes to be made. This is about all they should do as far as legal things, to review the laws. Are they okay for us? If they're not okay for us, what suggestions do we have? And finally, beyond this, all the feedbacks they get when they start operating, even after they have reviewed the law and changes have been made, as they operate, they will be getting feedback. They will be knowing where there are hitches, where there are glitches, hitches, and where there are deficiencies, where there are gaps, where there are vacuums, and they will be in a position to propose changes. So the feedback is critical. From the lending money bank's point of view, feedback is critical because that's the people who are, as I said, at the downstream end of the whole market. That's the people dealing with the final people where the money is collected. Because the ultimate thing is you are looking for people to mobilize their savings, to put in the system, to be put into productive use. That's essentially what is that intermediate. This is the advanced part of the intermediation that banks do. There's no better way they could do it than through the debt market. In this case, the domestic debt market. Ladies and gentlemen, I think, as I said at the beginning, what I attempted to do was not because I couldn't go around the problem. I said, okay, since the experts you believe in, all of us believe in, IMF and World Bank, have told us that there are 6 major building blocks for domestic debt market. I said, okay, by the time we are able to identify what we should do in respect of each block, we will have done much of the job. It's not that you'll be complete, but at least you will have done much of it. And then it is easier to identify the gaps as you operate and go ahead. As I conclude, let me emphasize that the whole essence of developing the domestic debt market is, one, to have a ready source of funding in form of debt for the sovereign. 2, to act as an alternative to external borrowing, so that you have an option. It is very much unlikely for developing economies of Africa. It is very much unlikely that you can do only with domestic debt. No. But because you have a domestic debt market, you are in a position to optimize in terms of what mix of external and domestic should you have. What mix of your portfolio? What percentage should be domestic? What percentage should be external? And these are part of the issues you resolve in your medium-term debt strategy. Of course, we have to bear in mind that that mix, that ratio, is not static. It reflects a particular reality which changes over time. And therefore, you have to be adjusting that mix to reflect the realities in order to optimize, even if approximately. And thirdly, you're developing the domestic debt market so that the private sector would be able to mobilize long-term funds as well to develop the real sector of the economy so as to solve the problems of employment and poverty reduction. And in the process, generate adequate growth for the economy, from which government derives adequate revenue, which feeds back into government's ability to service its debt, as measured by a debt service revenue ratio. So I think I will stop at this point. And what I've done is to give you an appetizer so that you'll be in a position when you do investigations, the few relics I have dropped would help you to develop much robust ideas about how to proceed with the function of developing the domestic debt market. Thank you.